wouldn't bother to tell my friends that I'd lost all my money either.
Especially to your accountant as well. That's
Yeah, I know. Your grandfather did that once.
G'day and welcome to Cuba to Rio. Just switch the game down there. We're at North Curl, my favourite place in the world, and we're off on January 20th is when I am flying over to Cuba. We just heard some intro music that my brother and I recorded a couple of days ago in our backyard. So I'm very excited. This will be a huge project for me. We're travelling the length and breadth of South America over the next 12 months, and it's going to be good. The reason I'm doing this podcast is just because I can't be asked to do a diary, really. And yeah, I'd love to make a note of all the awesome people and awesome noises and things that I come in contact with while I'm over there. So yeah, this is my starting point, my favourite place on the planet, and we'll hopefully find a few more. So this first interview, just so I could get to grips with all the equipment and things that I've bought to take along with me, is with my nan. She's 83 years old, still working, living with breast cancer, and I've just had the most amazing time over the last year getting to know her as an adult. So this podcast, it's been inspired by all the podcasts I listen to. It's well over 12 hours a week of podcasts. But so it'll be a mix of everything, and then hopefully by the time this thing's over, it'll be a thing of its own. So anyway, have a listen, enjoy, and good to have you along for the ride. All right, I'm out. How would you introduce yourself?
Introduce myself?
Yeah.
I'm Mavis Morris.
You're Mavis Morris?
Yeah.
And that's it? Okay. But so what would you identify as? Because you're a grandmother, you're a mother, but
yeah. I'm a person first.
You're a person first?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, but you're also a working person.
I'm a working person still, yeah.
Because men always frame themselves in terms of what they do, like their job and whatever. So I would say, I'm a swim coach, grudgingly.
Yeah, well, if I am going overseas, I say I'm a housewife.
Really?
Yeah, because that's easier to put on your forms that you're going in the other country, that you're a housewife. At my age, most people would be a housewife. But if you put down that you work in the fitness industry, or that if I work for tourist publicity or something, they would have thought, well, look at the age of this woman, she's still, she's working with this. But if you put down housewife, you have no problems at all.
So, where were you born? Because I understand it as within 5 k's of here.
No, I was born in Crow's Nest in Huntington Street.
Yeah, where I dropped off.
At home.
Yeah.
We were all born at home except Sister Barbara, the youngest, and Mum had her at the mater.
So was that a normal thing to do?
Yeah, you had the doctor and you had the nurse who used to come with Dr. Storman was his name. Yeah, Dr. Storman was Mum's doctor. And one of the children, when he went to the hospital, when Mum went to the hospital, she always had them at home. So all she said to the nurse that you better get Dr. Storman, and the nurse would ring the doctor, and Dr. Storman would come to the house and have the baby. She'd have the baby in the house. And then with Barbara, she went to the hospital, and they said, no, you've come too early. And I think you better ring Dr. Storman. So they rang Dr. Storman, and he said, if Mrs. Swan said that she's ready, she's ready. She's had 8 children before this one, so I think she knows.
Wheel the local couch in. Wheel the family couch in. That's wheel the couch in. Yeah. Is that where? Yeah.
I know. I mean, that's how it was done in those days. You had babies at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where do you sit in the family? You're number 4, right?
I'm number 5. There was Rex, Peg, Val, Jack, and then me, number 5. See, I had a brother that died at about 6 months. Bowel strangulation. He had bowel strangulation.
Oh,
the funny part was that he was called exactly the same as my father. His name was Jack Whiteford Swan. Yeah, that was his name. And Granny Swan, who was very superstition, she read people's palms.
Oh, she was
Granny
gypsy,
Swan.
wasn't she?
Yeah, she was gypsy. Oh, well, she used to dress up as a gypsy. And she said to them at the time, don't call him after Jack. That's bad. And of course, when he died,
Everyone's like,
Yeah,
oh,
she said,
heebie-jeebies.
man, I mean, he died. He wouldn't have died today. And
Did Granny Swan ever tell your fortune?
Oh, my father wouldn't have it. One day he walked in and we were reading tea leaves, and he caught us. Oh, we had a hole in the roof. Daddy just went absolutely bananas. Don't let me ever see you doing that bloody rubbish.
But did she make a living from this?
Oh, she used to get 5 shillings to read people's palms in those days. 5 shillings. Now, 5 shillings was half a dollar.
What would happen if she gave people a bad fortune? Would they come find her?
Didn't. Everybody, but they all queued up. She lived at Neutral Bay, and people queued up for her. And if they had a fete or anything like that, they'd put a tent up, and Granny Swan would be the person all dressed up as a gypsy, and she'd read their palms, and you know.
So do you know how she started getting involved with that?
Oh, maybe it was, I don't know. Dad's got a photograph. I'll show you a photograph of me and one of his sisters. My father gave this to me many, many years ago, and that was his sister Jessie. And Jessie died of tuberculosis because if you got TB in those days,
Assumption,
you died. Yeah. And he gave it to me. He said, "You look like so much like Jessie Mavis." He said, "I've got to give this to you, and always keep it." And her husband, I think they both died of tuberculosis. Her and her husband, because they had an epidemic of it here at one stage. Yeah.
So what was Crow's Nest like back when you lived there?
It was great, Crow's Nest. I mean, it was a working person's suburb. The Crow's Nest. Everybody'd help everybody. If you need your next door neighbour, if you needed anything at all, they'd be everybody helped everybody else. When the war was on, the lady across the road came over to Mum and said they built a shelter under their house. She came and knocked on the door and said, "Mrs. Swan, if there's an air raid or anything like that, you ought to come over yourself and the children and come. There's room for you in the air raid shelter."
What, 11 beds?
No, you'd all be sitting up, I suppose. I don't know. I never actually ever went in it, but that was how it was.
Yeah.
And if they used to have a chap that used to come around and people would bet on horses, on racing. And this chap, they called them SP bookies in those days. And they used to come round and you'd write on a sheet of paper whatever your name of your horse, and you'd put your threepence or your sixpence in, and you'd give it to this chap, and then he'd take it back. And then if your horse won, you went round to the people. It was the local butcher, was Mr. Mulcahy's. They were one of the places, you know. And if the police were around, all the neighbours would somebody'd run into the next street and say, "Tell so-and-so the police are around." And as he ran away, he'd be eating a Betty slips.
So they would get him.
But then everybody would say, "Oh, but I backed the winner, But everybody helped it, and we were never allowed to play in the street. Everybody used to go out and play in the streets because there were hardly any cars in those days.
Yeah.
And Huntington Street, you'd seen Huntington Street.
I was on today. Smash repairs. Yeah.
We lived in those little semis.
Yeah.
In Huntington Street. But Mum would never let us. We were never really allowed to go out in the street and play. People could come in and play, but she didn't even encourage that. There was enough of us. We all played with each other.
Did you have a backyard or anything?
Oh yeah, nice little backyard, and we had a cubby house, and when it was a little backyard, but the whole thing is that when you come from a big family, see, when we were there, Rex was at the war, he went into the army, and Peg went and lived with Grandma, who lived in Holtimer Street where we used to live.
Yeah.
That was at Grandma's house, so Peg went around there every night, and she'd slept with Grandma when Grandma got older.
Was that the gypsy grandma? Because that doesn't sound like Granny Swan.
No, the gypsy grandma was the Swans.
Yeah.
The other grandpeople, my Pearsons, they ended up, Mum's mother and father, he won the lottery with an uncle when it was Tattersalls, and they got $3,000 each in those days. And that allowed him to retire. Grandpa Pearson, he worked for the gasworks, but he could retire. They had a trip back to England, and they lived on their money. They had enough money to live on from then on.
£3,000.
£3,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
but that was the prize. And Uncle Bill, he was the local bottler. He used to do bottles, go around Crow's Nest and all those, and had a horse and cart.
So bottle-os for milk and alcohol only?
just empty bottles. He'd go and pick up everybody waited for Uncle Bill Pearson to come round. They wouldn't give them to anybody else. They wait for Uncle Bill Pearson, and when he got the lottery, he was going to give up work, but then he lost all his money, so he got his course and card out again, and he was a bottle out for the rest of his life. But he wanted to do
How did Bill spend his money then? What did he do with it?
No, he wanted to he wanted to be a bookmaker.
Oh,
and he had no idea. A bookmaker's got to be very clever at maths.
Yeah.
And he's got to work out his odds. I mean, he can't have more. He can't be paying out more than what he's taken in. He's got to take in more than he can pay out. So his odds have got to be cut back. So if a person comes in and says, I have £20 on that, or £10 on that, or what, he's got to work out his odds.
Yeah.
And he's got to be able to do this in his head. Well, Uncle Bill wasn't clever enough for that.
Oh.
I mean, he went down the gurgler very fast.
Yeah, with his 15,000.
But he was a lovely man.
Yeah,
lovely
no.
man.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Well, did you ever have any serious injuries? Have you ever broken bone?
No, never. Always had the end of my toes off.
How come?
Well, because the back veranda used to have a piece like, see how the door there's got it, but then it had a piece of wood. And Mavis, I never walked anywhere. I ran everywhere, and next thing, the top would be right off my toe. Mum had come and had to cut my pair of shoes, the toe out, so I could go to school and do all those sort of things. But I was not very good.
What were you like at school though?
Just the thing I liked, I was always good at maths. I was never that much good at English, but then the other subjects, I was all right at school. I got to Neutral Bay High, which was much better than the other girls. But then once I turned 15, and I wasn't that keen to stay at school anyway, so Mum just sort of said I could leave, because once you got to third year at the school that we went to, Peg and Val went to Neutral Bay too, you had to go to North Sydney Girls High. Well, girls didn't go up to year 5, it was only up to year 5. Only nurses and the girls who wanted to be professional. Well, the only thing that was open for girls in those days was really nursing, or I think a few of them might have done accounting, but none of them ever became engineers or doctors or anything like that. So only a very small fraction of girls, everybody else left in the third year. Yeah.
So what was 22-year-old Mavis thinking of? What did she want to do with her life?
I got married when I was 22. But up to that, I worked 2 jobs most of the time. Most of the times, I had no problems ever getting a job, because once they met you, and particularly behind the counter, because I was always very clever at adding up. I could just add up, and you have people that come in and I worked at a grocer's shop to start off with, Goodlands at Camaray.
Yeah.
I always wanted to work there. So I went there, and Miss Bush, she was our manager, because there were no men in those days because of the war. All the young men were at the war, so they were always women.
How long did it take them to come back? Because when you were born in 32, that would have been 47, and the war is 2 years gone by this stage when you were working.
Yeah, but this was after the war. A lot of the men never came back.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. But I was only 15 when I went to the war. I went to work.
Yeah.
And I went there, and then her mother worked at Crow's Nest at the picture theatre, and the mother said, she'd met me a few times, and she said to Miss Bush, do you think Mavis would work for me overnight? Behind the counter, because she's so good with her maths and everything. And then, so Peg and I took on that job. But then when Mum walked past one day at Goodlands, and I was carrying, in those days, we used to have to weigh up all the sugar and the salt. All those things came in big bags.
Yeah.
And the sugar was £60, and the bags of salt were even a lot more. And Mum walked past, and I was struggling around with this bag, and when I got home that night, Mum just said to me, Mavis, I think you should get another job.
Yeah.
So we looked in the newspaper, and that's how I became a dental nurse. They were advertising for a dental nurse at Crow's Nest. So I went up there, and I applied for it, got it straight away, and I was all of 16 years of age, and they put me into the surgery. We used to do anaesthetics.
Yeah.
And we used to have this old doctor that used to give these injections, pentothal. And there I'd be holding the person down, and you'd be doing the pentothal. But in those days, you did full mouth clearances.
Yeah.
People had come in, and you'd take all their teeth out, then you'd put a denture in. I mean, it was but just the way it was all done. And of course, then when I left there, I went into town I don't know why, I saw the job advertised in town as a dental nurse, And of course, once I said I had work in where they gave anaesthetics, I was in. That's where I met Auntie Bev.
Yeah, but so were you using chloroform or anything along those?
No, we didn't there. We used pentothal. They used to use in those days. But then when I went into town, we used to use ether. You put the mask on and pour the ether. That's how crude it was. Ether on, and there was the same. They used to have a doctor come in sometimes, but it was mostly ether that we gave there. But I mean, we nearly lost a patient at one place. In there, we nearly lost a patient. And when they had this cylinder of oxygen there, but when I got hold of it, the tube was so big, they should have had another tube attached to it.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They only had this big one, and if you put that up the person's nose, they would Anyway, lucky enough, the person came round. Another one. But everything in those days, when taking x-rays.
Oh, what did you do to win?
We used to hold the x-ray plates in the old days.
So what would all the doctors do? Would they just
Well, the dentists.
Yeah.
No, well, we had one when I went into town. We had more than one surgery. We had 2 surgeries that did fillings. We had another surgery that the X-ray machine was and everything there, and then we had the one where we used to do the dentist used to do dentures and all that sort of thing, and one was set up to do all the anaesthetics, when they're under. But I mean, we had one chap there one day, and he actually ended up, he drank so much that when you put the ether thing on, and Ivy poured, and his body just absorbed the ether.
Oh, Jesus.
I know, that's how much, and I mean, and I used to have to hold them down, because if they were only half under, well, you could see what would happen.
Teeth,
yeah.
Jesus.
But we had an old chap came in one day, and he said, I don't want anything. He said, I just want to sit here and you pull it out. It was a molar.
Yeah.
So Mr. Couch was the dentist, and Couchy, he wasn't very keen. He said, look, I don't really like to, can't I
to
just
get his
give you
finger
a bit
bitten
of
off.
injection? And the chap said, no, you go ahead, I'll be right. And he just held onto the side of the chair, and Couchy pulled it out.
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, yeah, that's what people were like in those days, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love work. I never ever not wanted to go to work. I can't ever remember not wanting to go. And of course, then when Brian and I got married, town was sort of, and there was that job offer at Willoughby.
Yeah.
And that's when I went and worked for Mr. Drewler's.
Yeah. So Brian was he was the boy next door, wasn't he?
Huh?
He lived next door.
Brian, Mrs. Pepper lived between us. There was Nanny's house here, Mrs. Pepper's their house there, Nanny's house, Mrs. Pepper's, and the Morrises lived there. Mrs. Pepper, that was in the middle here, they had no children.
Yeah.
And Brian's mother was always very, very sick. So Mrs. Pepper basically helped rear Brian.
Yeah.
That's why Brian was so, to her, he was her son.
Yeah.
And then when she died, she left him the house.
Did Mrs. Pepper have the horse?
Have the what?
You had a horse next door, didn't you?
No, that
Mrs.
was in
Pepper?
Huntington Street.
Yeah.
We had a vacant lot. The house was in the next street, and they had a big back, like a big area at the back, which was now another house around there. They've got a house built, but they had a horse in there, Dolly.
Dolly the horse.
Dolly, the day she died, she was rocking backwards.
Where would you, how would you see, were there fences? Were you guys up on the fence?
She'd climb up.
Yeah.
But then I was on the roof a lot of the time. I used to climb up onto the roof. And then Mum would come out yelling for me, and I'd be running around the chimney so she wouldn't see me. I should have been a boy. I really should have been a boy. Yeah. That's what everybody's, this was the whole thing.
Yeah.
I like things that boys, like as far as sport. I mean, every Saturday morning, Mum said I had to do the shopping before I could go to tennis. And I'd race up to Crow's Nest, do the shopping, come home with the shopping and put it on, and you've got everything, Mavis. Then I'd pick up Peg's tennis racket, and run down to Miller Street and wait for the East Linfield bus to come, hop on the bus and go off to Linfield, and I'd play tennis with my brother, sister and their friends. And then wasn't that long I was the best player there after no time at all.
Yeah.
Because between bat and ball, I always had a natural thing with bat and ball.
Yeah.
I could play tennis quite well right from the time I picked up a tennis racket.
And how does a relationship with the boy next door start? Because you would have been in such close contact for all of your life. Yeah.
No, we went to school together, Brian and I. We went to school together, and he didn't actually live next door until we moved around from Huntington Street to Holterman Street.
Yeah.
And then his mother passed away, so Brian was sent to Tasmania, and his father still lived 2 doors away, but his mother and father, but then when she died, Brian's father, Brian ended up being in Tasmania.
What, boarding school?
No?
Boarding school or working?
No, he just went there and worked. He was old enough to work in those days, so he went down there, and Uncle Jack, he didn't stay with anybody, so he must have been about 18 by this time, because he ended up getting a job and he lived with different people. He didn't have a very good life at that time, because his father just more or less, he didn't want him with him.
Around,
he just pushed him onto the relatives in Tassie. And then eventually when Brian came back, we went out together. Oh, well, I had other boyfriends before him, but then we went out together, and Dad had a lot of time for Brian because he knew him. Yeah. In those days, it was a big thing if you knew the boys. Dad was very protective of his daughters, but they were in those
days. He had enough
days.
of them.
Well, that's the whole thing. And poor Peg, I used to feel sorry for her because she belonged to this, during the war, this club down the Rocks area, was the Sailors Club, and she mixed with a lot of Americans and that. And Dad used to go and stand outside the club and wait for her to come out and bring her home. By public transport. He'd go in by public transport, wait for her, and then bring her home by public transport. And Peg put up with a terrible lot. That's why Peg, when she first went to work, she gave all of us pocket money. From the time she got her first pay packet, she gave us pocket money. Mum would give us 6pence, I think it was, and that'd take you to the movies, and you could buy an ice cream and lollies with that 6pence.
So how come Peg was flushed with money?
Because she worked.
Yeah.
And that was, Mum took board off it, but Peg was always a very, very, very good sister. Very good. And even when I was at home, she and Keith, they lived with us for a while, and they used to go walking with the dog when Peg was having Gregory.
Yeah.
And they used to say, would I like to go too? I must have been a pain in the ass. But anyway, we used to take the dog with us, and then she'd work with me. We always worked very well together, in anything. I would have always gone into business with Peg. Peg was a very, very good businesswoman.
Yeah.
And it was a shame she didn't have her own business. Sister Val, Vivian's mother, she was very good too. But see, then when I got the job tourist publicity, by this time Dad had passed away.
That was late 50s, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you had rides in the truck, didn't you, you kids?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, see, I worked for them for 20-odd years. But that was the same. They had an ad in the paper, I saw it, and they said an energetic woman that could drive in a little, what was in the car? The little...
it was an old van.
No, a little van it was. There were lots of... Anyway, it was the car in those days. And we'd gone out somewhere one night, and Brian Hemmings had one of them, and he got too drunk to drive home. So he said to me, "Can you drive home?" Because by this time I could drive,
Yeah.
He said, "Can you drive home?" So I drove home, because after I married your grandfather, I learned to drive. Could I drive home? A little mini minor truck it was, and it was a mini minor truck that tourist publicity gave you. So they sort of said you had to, drive this truck. And I'd driven this car home once from down the Spit to home, to Crow's Nest. So I said, oh yes, I said, I have driven I said, not a truck, but a car.
8Ks.
And I hadn't told a lie, And they just looked at it and they said, look, you've got the job. We'll give the another lady had been. And they said, you've got a job. And I said, have you got anything to say, Mavis? And I said, well, how about, I said, if I do it, I said, I'm not going to go back out and come back the same way. I said, I'm going to go around in a circle and do, around in a circle where I do quite a lot of suburbs. Like I'd do whatever suburb it was, and I could do I'd go to Liverpool and drive back another way and that. And he said, that's a really good idea, Mavis. And I said, well, what happens if I can do it in less time? He said, doesn't make any difference. He said, we'll pay you the same. He said, if you can do it in less time, he said, that's up to you. and I did that for 20 odd years.
What was the purpose of the tourist publicity though? Were you taking brochures
Colin
or something
came,
out
and
to
you took all the
travel
brochures.
agents?
You went down to Collins when he lived at Camaray to start off with, and then down to Seaforth, and you loaded up the truck with all the brochures, what you'd need for the week, the boxes.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's how I got so good at stacking. No, well, that was the whole thing.
Life skill stacking.
That's right. It was amazing every job you took, But I was my own boss, and of course I'd had your mum by that time.
Yeah.
And mum had had her, but now the times, once she got to school, it was good because one of the ladies used to living up the street. She'd bring her home from school.
Yeah.
And when we moved over here, so it just all worked out very well. But in the holidays, we'd put Kimbo's. We'd take our lunch with us and her costume and everything, and I'd go to a beach and we'd have our lunch there while she had a swim and everything. And then, your mother was a lovely little girl. She was so easy to rear.
Yeah.
She was actually a little bit, until she went to America, she really didn't stand up for herself very well with Brian at all. But once she came back from America, she stood up
Had
for
a little
herself.
bit of lip.
No. Brian needed it. Yeah, he needed it really, because if she came to me and said, "Mum, can I go so and so?" I'd think, well, would I want to do that at whatever age she was?
Yeah.
And if I'd sort of think, yes, I could do that and I'd be responsible, I'd say yes, that's fine. If you go with your friends and that, because when you're an only child, it's different to.
It's a different style of parenting, that's for sure, because you've only
But
got
your
the one.
mother, for you, your mother has been a superb mother for you
I'm not
boys.
gonna
She really
dispute
has.
that.
You would never have got somebody to be as good a mother as Kim's been to you three boys. Because basically she can organise everything so well, but she's always been like that. And her life has been you, even though she's done a lot of other things, but once she had started to have you, you boys all came first,
Yeah, no,
And I mean, how she put up with your father at times, I wouldn't know. No. Well, but she did, and everybody works their own house how they do it.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why.
Well, from there, let's step back then. So what was married life for you like?
Work.
As
Well,
in
you
you
went
would
to
work to
and
be
then
out.
I'd come home of a Friday night, and I'd stand and on the Saturday and I'd cook enough stuff to last me the whole week, like cakes and meals. I'd do casseroles, all that. So because when I went to work, your dad had grandfather would put the stuff in the oven, or else he'd put it on the top of the stove, and then I'd ring him from work and say, "I'll be finished in half an hour," or whatever I was, and he'd put the vegetables on very low. I was only at Willoughby, so it'd be 10 minutes. By the time we got there and home, it'd be about 20 minutes. So he'd put the gas on very low, and by the time we got home, all we had to do was cook the meat.
So what did you guys do once you had the time together?
See, we were 8 years without children.
Yeah.
We didn't have Kim till 8 years and even with Kim, they thought I'd lost Kim.
Yeah.
When I went, the doctor said he was sorry. I had a hemorrhage at work. I rang them at the doctors, and he said, "I'll come in the morning, Mavis, but I think you probably lost the baby." And when I went, Kim was there, still there, but everything else had come away. So I really didn't. I bought maternity clothes, but I hardly ever used them because I never got that big.
Yeah.
Because I had all this stuff had come away about 3 months. So anyway, and then of course Kim, when we had Kim, she was taken straight to the children's hospital from the mater.
Oh, so was Mum born premature?
No, she born with a blockage here.
Right.
And she'd throw up because with the valve, it didn't close.
Between the lungs and...
Just here in the chest,
Yeah.
in the here. There's a valve there, and when she'd eat, but it'd stay open, and then she'd throw up. And I mean, when she was a little baby, the net you put over them, that's how
Projectile.
That's right. You don't realise how much comes out of, when you want to get rid of something. So,
Jeez.
My dad he absolutely idolised, my father, he idolised you, Kim. He just thought, because she was a little girl, and he really hadn't had a lot to do with any of us because of being so many. But Kim used to have breakfast with us, and then she'd go through PEPs. That's how she became so used to PEP. And then she'd go in and have breakfast with, Mum would have something for her for breakfast with Pa.
On the other side.
And then she'd sit on the front veranda with him.
So, given they had so many grandkids, how were your parents as grandparents?
Great.
Yeah.
My mother was great. Only day that she would not have grandchildren, most of the girls worked, and she'd have the kids. We used to have Gregory, and that's how we got to know Gregory and Vivian so well, because they basically came home from school to Mum, and she basically read those two, and they used to fight like cat and dog. Even she'd say, "He's looking at me again, Nan. He's looking at me," because
these are Mum's cousins.
Used to tease her.
So what was it like having a hobbyist for a husband? In Brian.
Well, Brian had his. He always had his shed.
Yeah.
See, his father was very much that way, and his father went through 2 wives.
What did the shed start like? Was it a small shed?
No. There was always a shed across the back. When Brian got the house, Brian and I bought the house, or Brian did. When Dad Morris got in his second marriage, his wife didn't want to live there. It wasn't good enough for her to live at Crow's Nest, so she wanted something bigger and better. So they sold the house half to Brian. Brian owned half the house. His mother left him, because she knew what Mr. Morris was like, with ladies. So she left Brian half the house. So Brian owned half the house. So my father said to Brian, "Go to the bank, Brian, borrow the other half, and then you'll own the house." So Brian went and did this, and so we owned Holtimer Street, because we paid that off in no time, because I worked and Brian
both of you
so
worked,
that was fine. And then of course, then when Pep died, she left Brian the house. So Brian actually owned the 2 houses. Yeah, he owned the 2 houses. So then that's when Brian said, "Well, how about if we look around for a house, somewhere else?" So he came over and saw this and could see that he could put sheds in the back. He bought this house because he could build that big shed at the back.
Yeah, because there used to be a tennis court here, and it's...
But that's what he wanted to build, a shed for him and his father, because Dad Morris was a very clever little man. And
what did he do?
He was a tinsmith by trade, but he was just clever. He could, with his hands. And Brian was lucky enough that his father they spent a lot of time together, and it all rubbed off on Brian. Brian could turn his hand to about anything, And then he ended up. Came here. We put tenants in, but we went to the bank and we got the wrong loan.
But how? What?
We put it that anyway. The bank caught up with us, and they ended up. We had to pay extra, But and then Brian said, "Well, how about if we move, out, Mavis?" So by this time we had tenants in Holtiman Street, so we got the rent from there, and then that's why we had tenants in the 2 houses down there for quite a while. And then this section of the house was all put on. We knocked it down. I sat out in that backyard with my dad when he wasn't very well, and he sat on something on there, and I cleaned all the bricks. These are all double bricks. And the brick underneath could be old bricks, so Brian had me chipping all the old cement off. I sat for mortar. Days and days doing that out there for that.
Yeah.
So we had this. That was $8,000.
The extension.
Yeah, 8,000. It would have been pounds in those days. It might have been dollars. Anyway, the whole extension was 8,000, and that was the kitchen and the whole thing was 8,000. All the cementing. And we only had 5,000, which was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah.
But Auntie Peg came and saw me. She said, "Keith and I will loan you the 3,000 that you need, Mavis." And I said, "Oh, are you sure?" And she said, "Yes, I know you'll pay me back." She said, and I said, "Well, we will pay you whatever interest you lose in the time that it takes me. We pay you the interest back, Peg."
Yeah.
And she said, "Fair enough. No papers, no nothing. She just trusted me, so,
Siblings.
We ended up that I paid her back in 12 months, I think it was. I ended up paying her back.
But this was the 80s, so it could have been
but we had
8% interest under Keating?
No. It was not very bad, about 3 or 4% or something. It wasn't that high. Anyway, we paid her back, and but then your grandfather got a little bit too carried away with old cars, and he ended up buying 3 old cars, and I absolutely flipped. I just said to him, 1 I didn't mind, but not 3, and he used our money. So I just said to him, "You are never going to get another penny of my money. I'll work, but it all goes into my name," which it did. And of course, when he died, I had this pool of money that I had, which I needed because I had a funeral to pay for, and Brian had just about gone through all our joint money buying things. And one of the chaps, he sold one of the chaps a car after he died. He bought that car, but then that's how we got left with the MG and Jaguar, and he had the Rover. Yep. Yeah, he had all these cars,
So what was your favourite of his hobbies?
Well, he had photography. He had his cars. He had all these MG car clubs and all these sort of things. Yeah, he had all these hobbies. That's where all our money went.
Yeah.
On Brian's hobbies, because by this time he's actually semi-retired.
Yeah.
And I was the main breadwinner by that stage, and so this was the whole thing, that your grandfather reminds me a bit of Michael. He could never buy anything that was reasonable. He always had to have the top of the range. Anything he bought, like photography. Well, you look inside all those cameras just sitting in the drawer in there.
Yeah.
I mean, all those should be just put on eBay or something and sold.
You would make a kill because
well, if you
people
want to do
love
that,
those vintage
you're more
cameras.
than welcome to.
Yeah.
Just have a look in there because nobody uses them. They've sat there for 20 years.
Tell you what,
So-
we need to get onto this quick because the hipsters aren't going to...
No?
Hipsterism won't be around forever and they love those old cameras. If
Yeah,
any
look,
of them have little
come
wind
and
up...
look. You come and have a look at them.
And we're back. So where were we? I've been to the bathroom. We've looked at the cameras. All right. Well, so you had Kim, and then what happened when grandchildren came into the world?
Well, you were born. You were the first of the grandchildren, and at that time, your mother and father, Brian was alive for about 6 months of your life, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but he died of pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, he died of parrot. Yeah, and but he knew. I mean, and it was actually nearly to the day that he died.
What, they
It was
gave
6
him
months.
a...
Gave him 6 months.
Yeah.
Reg and I went up. We went up. They rang here to say they weren't going to operate on him. They were going to do an operation which would have left him as a diabetic.
Yeah.
If you do that. So and then I spoke. They rang me and I answered the phone. And the doctor said, "Look, Mrs. Morris, we'd like you to come up with Brian." He said, "We'd like to have a word with you." They sat around a table and discussed his case, and they realised that, Brian there was no way. So the doctor just sat there and said, "Poor Brian." They said, "Oh, we're sorry, Mr. Morris, you've got 6 months to live."
That's a
And
terrible thing to tell
and
someone.
We were like stunned mullets. Reg and I, we just sort of sat there for a couple of seconds, just sort of trying to absorb it.
Had there been any warning that was how dire
No,
things
what
were?
happened at Christmas time, Brian, Christmas dinner, he didn't feel well, and I went crooked at him. I said, "Oh, come on, Brian, And then the next morning, Boxing Day, he walked out, or the day after, and he was yellow.
Oh,
And that's
like
the
jaundice,
first sign
yeah.
of jaundice. So I said, "Well, we better go straight up to the doctor." So I rang the doctor, and he said to me, "As soon as you arrive," when I explained, he said, "As soon as you arrive, Mrs. Morris, go to the receptionist and we'll put Mr. Morris in straight away." So we arrived, and Brian went straight in, and the doctor just took one look at him and he said, "Oh, I'm going to send you to a specialist up at Westmead." So we went up there to this fellow. That's when he decided that Brian, what it was, and they'd operate. And then they rang me to say they weren't going to operate, and then we had to go up and see him, and he told us that your grandfather had 6 months to live.
Oh, so
And so we
what
walked-
on earth do you...
And the first thing your grandfather said to me was, "I won't watch Matthew grow up, Mavis." I thought, shit. Reg looked at me and I looked at Reg, because we'd been around a long time, Reg and I, as friends sort of thing, the three of us. And anyway, Reg asked the doctor there, and then he said, "Oh, can we get some more other opinion?" And he said, "Well, Westmead is the main one for that." He said, "We have all the specialists here and everything." So you couldn't have done any better.
Yeah.
But then your grandfather tried everything. I mean, he went to the Gawler Institute down in Melbourne, and then the last thing he was going to do was go over to Western Australia and go into a microwave. This was this doctor, and he knew Brian was terminal.
Yeah.
Anyway, your mother wrote, Uncle Ross put him off. He said, "Mavis can't go by herself. I'll have to go, and I've got to get time off." And Uncle Ross sort of fobbed him off going, And then your mother wrote to him and just basically put on, that he knew that, her father was terminal, and why was he insisting that he could, give him this treatment. Anyway, next thing, Brian got a letter back from the doctor to say they reviewed the case, and they realised that the operation...
So what sort of plans did you guys put in motion if someone's got 6 months to live? Did you guys go on a holiday, or was it just full on trying to get everything
Well,
in?
Brian just, some of the stuff that he could drink and eat, Matt, I don't know how he did it. People would tell him to do this and do that. Then he went to the Gawler Institute for a couple of 2 weeks. I think he went down there. He's still going. He still sends me letters for me to donate to him.
Yeah.
Gawler. Now Brian's been gone 20 odd years, so he's still going down there. and it was the biggest rip-off. And then this fellow with the microwave, that was that finished, and then everybody went down the snow. Your mother and father and Ross and them all went to the valley.
Yeah.
And I should imagine you would have been there too. And that weekend, your grandfather, he just really went downhill.
Spiraled, yeah.
So I got in touch with palliative care. I'd been to a social, Kim took me to a social worker, and the social worker, she wanted to know, well, I wanted to go and have more or less. I said, no, I was fine. Your mother needed a little bit of help, but I was fine. And I said, you just tell me what I've got to do. She said, well, when Mr. Morris gets to a certain stage, you ring, get the palliative care doctor to come from River Road, and he'll come up, and he basically will tell you what you've got to do from that time on. So as it turned out, the palliative care doctor got the flu or something. So anyway, he ended up coming after, the next day he came, and then he arranged for the chemist around here to get the morphine, and I had to give it to your grandfather.
Yeah, like intravenously or tablet form?
Yeah, no, with an injection. Anyway, I went around to the chemist, and it was must have been during the holidays, or because they were all away, so it must have been around. And the chemist said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't get this. So Mavis absolutely flipped a lid, and I said, and I explained to him, I said, oh, Mrs. Morris, sorry, we'll get right onto it, and because, we'll get it sent out to you. Anyway, I went around and got the stuff. I have a feeling that you might have taken it orally.
Yeah.
And I really was. I was all by myself, and I had your grandfather so ill, and I think I gave him too much. So I rushed around to the chemist again and said to him, because if I'd killed your grandfather, and I said to him what I'd done, and he said, don't worry, Mrs. Morris, what you gave him, he'll be all right,
Yeah.
So anyway,
just be a bit zoned out for a few hours.
But anyway, by the next night, your grandfather, he was on the bed, and he was thrashing around like an animal, and in the end, I rang down at the hospital. I had to ring, and I rang down there, and whoever came to the phone, they just said, look, can you, do you want to send an ambulance to come up, or do you want us to, no, I said, no, I'm fine, I can drive him myself. I said, I'll get him all ready and I'll drive him down, and your grandfather hated my truck. He did, he really hated my truck. And he really...
I love how things are so dire, and yet still people cling to the habits that they have.
Grandfather, it was raining, and I had to go across the expressway. You're going too fast, you're doing this wrong, Mavis. In the end, I said, for heaven's sake, be quiet, Brian. Let me just drive you. So we got down to River Road. Of course, you had to go into Crow's Nest and turn down to get there. Drove in. They were waiting for me with a chair to put your grandfather in. Took him in, and the nurse came out, and she said, look, we'll take over from now. Are you all right to drive home? And I said, yeah, I'll be fine, thank you, And she said, we'll just give him some morphine. Now, what they did for the next 2 days is just fill your grandfather up with... They killed him. And that was good. It was the best thing that could happen.
Euthanasia.
I believe, that's why I'm a great believer in euthanasia. I mean, your grandfather hung on for quite a few days. Pat came up, his cousin from Tasmania.
Did Mum and everyone come back from the...
Oh, they were all back from the snow.
Already,
and then I kept on working because that kept me occupied, And I was in the cross, and all of a sudden, a shiver ran right through me. And I thought, I'll go back to the hospital. So I got back into the truck, drove to the hospital, and as soon as I got to the hospital, I knew your grandfather had passed away. Because everybody was standing at the end of the hall waiting for me, the nurse and the doctor tell me, and that, and I thought, your grandfather had... And I'd only been there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and who should walk down the hallway but Ross?
Yeah.
He'd come to visit, so Ross was there, and so this was the whole thing, And so then we went, and you don't really remember Brian's funeral, and that somebody said to me, you really won't remember, Mavis, much about it, and you don't.
No. So how did you reset after all that 6 months of living just hell?
I think it was a relief, actually.
Yeah.
When I look back now, I really think that it was going to happen. So once it happened, you could get on back onto with your life.
So what did you throw yourself into?
So I took off. I just rang Colin and said I wouldn't be working, and the girls. We had a couple of other girls, and they just said, tell Mavis not to worry. We'll do her work for the next couple of weeks. We won't do it the same, but we'll do as much as we can for her. But after somebody dies, it takes you about 6 months to wind everything up.
Yeah. And then after that point, you went to Alaska, didn't you?
Where did I?
Alaska? Did you go to Alaska?
Oh,
or was that a couple of years
after a while,
afterwards?
yeah. I decided I had to do something by myself to prove that I could, because your grandfather had always travelled with me before that. So I just decided I had to. The family weren't very happy about me going by myself.
No.
No, they weren't.
No.
Yeah, but I was quite capable. If I wasn't sure in some of the countries I went to, I'd just go to people that were young.
Yeah.
And most of those people speak English anyway.
So why Alaska?
Well, I went to Canada because, you know, Lisette, that played your mother and father, and Paul.
Yeah, they're Canadian. Yeah.
Yeah, well, their parents, so Lisette's parents lived in Calgary. So what I did is I organised a trip that I stayed with people sometimes that I knew. She offered to mind me. Alaska, Kim had gone to school with one of the girls and I stayed with her. So I sort of did tours, but then I'd go and stay with somebody for a week or so, you know. But by the time I'd done a half the holiday, I had reduced myself to the big pack down to a carrier bag, and I'd wash things out, and I basically never unpacked the big pack. I got fed up with unpacking the big pack. So
why do you travel? Why do you meet new people, or just to see new places?
Yeah, I like travelling. Well, your father and mother and I did the trip to Nepal, and we'd done the trip to Africa. So I'd been to those two places, and then I went to Alaska by myself. So I'd done that before, like that. No, I did that. Your grandfather was alive when we did those trips because he didn't want to go.
Yeah.
He stayed here. But of course, then when we had the avalanche at Nepal, that's where we were.
Yeah.
And your grandfather could see me all under the snow. He was madly trying to find out how many people had been killed. I mean, of course, they could throw it back to the... Yeah. But anyway, we knew about it.
Yeah.
It had happened just before we got there, so it was when we were there, but it all happened.
So what happened in Africa when...
Africa was a good trip, yeah. We travelled from Harare to
in
Nairobi.
Zimbabwe, yeah.
Yeah, and went around right around in a circle. And then your father and mother, they went on to do their trip up to have a look at the gorillas, and they went and did Mount Kenya after we'd done the one in Africa. They went on and they did Kenya as a Kenyan mountain as well.
Yeah.
The parents, yeah.
So I remember, the only thing I remember really of your trip to Africa is this great photo, or this bit of footage Dad has of you in a shower block. When
Have we still got that?
I've seen it recently. What happened?
That's good because the mother and father thought they'd lost that at one stage. Yeah, no, that was funny. I mean, it wasn't funny really at the time. I got into the shower block, and this bloody elephant had come into the compound where we were staying. You know, now elephants can, if they're all right, if you leave them alone. You know, and I was in the shower and I looked out through the window and there was the head of the elephant.
Peering in, pervert elephant, yeah.
So I thought, my God, what am I going to do? So I watched it, and as it walked around, I came out of the shower. Did I have a towel around me?
Yeah.
I thought I might have had a towel around me. I had a towel around me, and I sort of walked, and then once I got out of the side of the elephant, I ran around back to where I came from. And Jesus. Everybody cheers.
This massive bull elephant. I remember the block didn't have a roof, did it? So it was just staring through. It was a bunch of walls and a shower and just staring down at you.
I was too busy looking at this big bull elephant's head in there where you look down. And I thought, oh, Christ, what am I going to do? You know, 1, 2 feet and it would have crushed the whole thing.
Block, Jesus.
So we went there, you know. No. But I stood up. People, when I'm on those trips, I don't let any of the other people put over me.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes your dad's a bit easygoing. I'm not.
No.
A lot of people didn't bother to read, particularly English people. They didn't bother to read what they were supposed to bring, and they'd come along and they'd want to borrow everything from you all the time. And they wanted to borrow your father's. They had some drops for their eyes because they were on a 12-month
trip.
And this chap, they couldn't make out why. He was being mean, not opening it and letting this chap. And I just went over and I said, they've got a 12-month trip. You got the list the same as we did. Why didn't you buy your own? And they looked at me and they said, because they all liked me, and they looked at me and I said, no. I said, you people can't come and expect other people on the trip to, one girl borrowed my raincoat, and my raincoat, it smelt for years after. I've still got the raincoat inside. In fact, I've got a raincoat. If you want to take a raincoat with you, I can give you a raincoat.
I've got raincoats. Plus, I don't want one that smells like some English
no,
broad.
This was your grandfather's. This is one of your grandfather's.
Oh, no.
You should carry one in your bag for when it rains.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, like, how did it come that... so, we're back in Australia. How did it come to be that you ran with the Olympic torch? What on earth?
Well, that was your mother's idea. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And because I was such a well-known person in the area, see, I'd coached squash and I'd coached tennis and I'd done skiing, and so she went around, wrote to all the people, sort of said, we're going to write and see if Mum can carry the torch. And of course I knew Joe Hockey.
All right. Ex-Treasurer of Australia, now no longer the member for North Sydney.
And also with Joe and Ian, the squash court, everybody that knew me that I'd worked with, Jim Joseph, all those people, they all wrote letters into the Olympic thing. And of course I think Joe was on that committee, and when they got all these letters about Mavis Morris, they decided apparently that I was going to be the community runner, which was a very high honour to be chosen by your community. So all I knew about it really was I went out and got a letter out of the letterbox and opened it up, and this letter said that I was going to carry the torch.
Yeah.
And I could not believe it, Matthew. I just looked at this letter. Why me? Typical me, why me sort of thing, And I forget who. I think I might have rung your mother first to say I'm going to carry the torch. I think she cried and I cried, and then of course then the Olympic people take over. They tell you what you can do, but I've still got my uniform and everything's still sitting in there.
Yeah, no, that's why I think I'm doing this trip, is because like that Sydney 2000 Olympics was such a huge deal because you ran with the torch.
Yeah.
Mum was a volunteer.
Yeah.
And like I've loved the Olympics since, and I'm off to visit the Rio ones.
But if you buy these things...
Okay, so we're sitting in Nan's living room here with the Christmas tree, and under the tree we've got Millie, Ollie and Sid, the Sydney
Okay, well I'd like to
guys.
buy the next lot. So whenever you buy them, you tell us how much I owe you, and we reimburse you.
So we'll buy the Olympic mascots from Rio and send
Well,
them
that's
back
what I'm saying,
to you.
but if you said, but make the whole cost how much it is.
Yeah,
and then if you want the money over there, I'll give your mother the money and she can transfer it to you.
Too easy.
But if you don't need the money, well, you can get it off me when you come back, or I can write a cheque and they can put into your... Well, it's better that we just put into your account, isn't it?
I'd say so. So what's it like running down bloody Help Street
Well, you had a
Hall,
little
was
girl
it?
with you.
Oh, right.
You had a little girl. Oh, they're yours. They're
Yeah,
yours.
no, I'll pick them up.
You had this little girl, and she was from one of the Catholic schools.
Yeah.
And it was up to me whether I gave her the torch or not.
Okay.
And so I said to her before we started, I said, now when we get to Victoria Avenue, I'll hand you the torch for a little while and then I'll take it back. And we came to this arrangement that when I said I was ready, she gave it back and we did this. I'm very sorry now that I never kept her name and her address
See
or
what
something.
she's up to.
Because I'd love to sort of get in touch with her and say, what she's done since she carried
It's
that.
probably on the news article there that we could find out. Anyway, so it was great because I remember sitting on top of a post box and watching you go past. That was awesome.
I could not believe the people that came that knew me. I mean, the people I worked for, Tourist Publicity, Timmy was there, the Josephs, the people from 1812, they were all there, all the squash players, they all turned up. And I mean, when we got to the end there, you probably remember we had so many people around, and somebody took the torch off me, and I remember Janet, I think it was, or somebody said, oh, we have to watch the torch because they might run off with it. That never entered my head that anybody would
pinch the torch.
Yeah, but I couldn't believe the amount of people that just want to touch the torch.
Oh, no,
it's unbelievable, But I can't believe the people, even here, that's dark when they come in here. One of the nurses came through the other day, and all of a sudden she said to me, oh, you've got an Olympic torch, Mavis.
Yeah.
And I said, how did you see that? And she said, I noticed it
It's
in the cupboard
it's
there.
such a recognisable shape. Yeah.
And she said, I recognise it. Then two of them that came after that to visit me, they said, you've got an Olympic torch.
Yeah. So okay. So the nurses are all talking. So why do the nurses know about you, Nan? What's
The nurses.
Yeah.
Oh, these are the nurses that came to when I had to have them to do the drainage.
Yeah. So the last 5 years has it been now? You've been living with breast cancer.
Breast cancer. This is my second lot. I went 5 years with the first lot and just about finished the 5 years with a treatment. So it'd be 4 years. I was going into my 5th year of remission when they found the cancer this time.
Yeah. And so, given your experience with PAR, what getting a cancer diagnosis, what did that feel like?
I think the first time I got it. The second time, I was disappointed more than anything else that had come back. Because I only had a few months to go, and they probably would have. Well, if they hadn't found me in that last, when I went and had that mammogram, and then they did the ultrasound, they ordered an ultrasound as well. If I hadn't had those, I reckon I probably would have been dead in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I think the cancer would have eventually, because it was a different type of cancer, and then when the doctor said to me, what did I want to do? I looked at your mother, and I knew what your mother wanted me to do. And I thought, well, I can't do that to him, So I said, well, I'd do the treatment a second time. But when they sort of said basically that this had to come off and then they'd found all that, I'd wish that they'd taken both off because it would have solved a much bigger problem.
Yeah, so you've had a mastectomy.
I've had a mastectomy this side, and they took glands. They've taken 13 or 14 glands out of this one because they found another 2 glands here. This is where the trouble started. The 2 glands that were left there had gone through, and that's where we got them, those things, those nodes coming out. They came out, and that's how the specialist recognised them straight away. The cancer had moved across into this breast. So that's why, but they've only taken glands off. So if they start to go again, my only other option is to go and have that one off.
Yeah.
So, but we'll see.
We'll see. So tomorrow you're going in, and we'll know the roadmap for 2016.
We have our first one, and it's only once off.
Yeah.
They only have to do that once. They have to do that, and then if we get these new drugs, they discontinue the chemo and put on these 2 new drugs.
Yeah.
And these 2 new drugs don't have the side effects. You won't lose your hair, and you probably won't be sick.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of how the drugs affect me.
Yeah.
Whether or not.
So it's up to the federal government if they give an 83-year-old woman.
But at my age, they probably think, well, a certain amount of treatment, it'll sort of in your old age groups.
Yeah.
So they
you're still working and everything, and you've got fabulous quality of life.
Yeah, but they don't know I'm working.
Yeah.
They know that I cope very well.
She's off the books.
The doctors all say, how well I'm coping. But I think I'm not coping as well this time as I think I did the first time. But then I haven't started the chemo yet.
Yeah.
But I think getting over, at first, I was 5 years younger. And I think I coped with because I was very fit then. And I'm fit now for my age.
Yeah.
But 5 years ago, I was fit for about a 70-year-old.
Yeah.
This was the whole thing. I know by the amount of what I can do down the gym now.
Yeah.
Instead of doing, I'm down there for 2 hours, I can be home here in an hour and a half now.
Yeah.
I do sort of 20 minutes of the cycling and 15 minutes of the rowing, and so I've cut back. But I've got the rowing up to the full height. It's just a matter of pulling it harder and everything.
Yeah.
But I find that it gets a bit sore. These muscles haven't been working for 8 or 9 weeks, so they get sore.
Yeah, because you're not allowed to lift everything with all the scarring and the like.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I could unpull the stitches,
Oh, so they're still in?
Well, no. They should all be repaired now. Okay. This is all held. This is why I couldn't, because they didn't want this breaking.
So what is your... What do you think, what is your approach to, if you get us,
I'll just go back to a normal life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just go back to the gym, 3 or 4 times a week. And I'll go give Uncle Ross a game of bat ball first and see how I cope. Uncle Ross said whenever I'm ready, because bat ball's all low, he won't hit anything into the air.
Unless
but it's the pressure of the ball hitting the
racket and spin.
So I'll just go, and if I find it's just too much, the running and that, I'll just say to Ross, you know, I think we should finish. Well, he'll say, say it to me. I mean, he keeps his eye on me like I don't know what. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I'll try and go back. If I can play bat ball, well, then I can go back to tennis.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the serving with tennis. I mean, I noticed I had to try. I tried to pass a parcel up to Uncle Keith the other day. It was on the front veranda from Karen. I don't know. It was quite heavy, but Uncle Keith was at the top of the stairs, and I tried to lift it up with this hand, and this arm just couldn't lift it. I mean, it couldn't take that weight.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to force it.
Yeah.
So I just walked up the stairs a bit further and put a hand under this one and lifted it, you know. But this is the sort of thing I've noticed that, you know, like when I peg things on the line,
Yeah.
if that last little stretch sometimes, that's a stretch sometimes. So, you know that you don't do that sort of thing.
You were doing that like
But
3
I did.
days after you had all this surgery and stuff. I came over to help you with the washing. No, I've loved this year. So I've had this year off,
Yeah.
and like I've loved being able to come down every week and have a
Oh,
chat
it's
with
been
you.
good. I've been
Yeah.
enjoyed you. It's the whole thing, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, have we finished now? Because you got
I think we're finished. But firstly, off, like, what do you think happens to you when you die, though?
nothing.
Nothing.
It's like putting your foot on a cockroach.
Putting your foot on a hot cockroach. No.
I've never heard anybody ever come back and say.
What happens if you get up there and there's thousands
Well,
of little cockroaches that you've crushed?
Packer, I reckon he never saw anything, and somebody else I only saw on television the other day, they died for so long, and they reckon they never saw anything at all. So to me, once your life is finished, you go into the, well, I'll be cremated,
Yeah.
but you know, then you go into the ground, I mean, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, your ashes just go back into the earth, and, you know, but I've never seen anybody ever come back, have you?
No, I have not. But what do you think of the trip next year? We'll finish on this one.
Where to? Your trip?
My trip, yeah.
Oh, I think you're doing it. I think you should have done it this year, actually. I think
I
you
don't
wasted this year. You could have done it there and then and got your year over, but then you wouldn't have done the Rio. That's the whole reason you went this year.
Exactly.
So, look, it's your life, Matt. You have to run your own life. But I think when you come back, you have to get your act into gear
Yeah, in whatever
and grow.
shape or
I
form
know,
it
I'm
is.
hoping the 12 months away makes you grow up a little bit more.
I've already had my 12 months away to grow up. I was supposed to have done it back in 2009 when I was in Costa Rica for the year.
I know, but you didn't do it. You came back the same Matt, actually, you know.
All right. Okay, well, we'll call it quits then.
Call it
And
quits.
thank you very much.
That's all right, anytime.
All right, we are done. So, just a little update there. Nan did get approval for the drug from the federal government, so she started her new batch of chemo and is doing well. We just had Christmas and everything, and I'll hopefully get another one of these together before we actually head off on the trip on January 20. Alrighty, catch you around, and thanks for listening.